The room went silent the moment the words, "Department of Revenge," were spoken. Cameras clicked. Senators leaned forward. Staffers froze over their notes. At the center of the storm sat Pam Bondi, facing a pointed line of questioning from Mazie Hirono. What began as a routine confirmation hearing suddenly turned into one of the most intense exchanges of the day. Senator Hirono accused the Justice Department, under Bondi's potential leadership, of becoming something far more dangerous than a neutral law enforcement agency. Her words were blunt. "Are you turning the Department of Justice into a Department of Revenge?" What happened next stunned the entire chamber. And the response from Bondi shifted the tone of the hearing in a way no one expected. The Senate hearing room was already thick with tension long before the most dramatic exchange of the day unfolded. Rows of cameras lined the back wall. Reporters leaned over laptops, typing quickly as every question and answer was recorded in real time. Staff members whispered quietly to one another while senators shuffled through thick binders of prepared notes. At the center of it all sat Pam Bondi, facing the long semicircle of lawmakers who had gathered to evaluate her nomination. For Bondi, this was a familiar environment. After years in high-profile legal and political roles, she had become known for her confident presence and sharp courtroom instincts. During her time as Florida's Attorney General, she built a reputation as a tough prosecutor who rarely backed down from a challenge. Supporters in Washington pointed to that record as proof that she had the experience needed to lead the Department of Justice. They described her as disciplined, knowledgeable, and fearless under pressure. But not everyone in the chamber was convinced. Critics argued that the Justice Department requires more than legal experience. It demands absolute independence from politics, something they worried could be compromised by Bondi's close connections to powerful political figures. For those senators, the hearing was not just about qualifications. It was about trust. And among the most skeptical voices on the committee was Mazie Hirono. Hirono had built a reputation in the Senate for asking direct and often uncomfortable questions during confirmation hearings. She was known for cutting through prepared talking points and pushing nominees to clarify exactly where they stood on issues of law, power, and accountability. Throughout the hearing, Hirono listened carefully as Bondi answered questions from other senators. Occasionally she glanced down at her notes, jotting down a few words before looking back toward the witness table. When her turn to speak arrived, the tone in the room shifted slightly. Her questions were calm, but they carried a deliberate edge. She asked Bondi about prosecutorial discretion, the responsibility of federal investigators, and the importance of ensuring that legal decisions are based solely on evidence, not political considerations. Bondi answered each question carefully, often emphasizing the same core principle, that the Department of Justice must enforce the law equally, regardless of who is involved. For a few minutes, the exchange seemed almost routine. No raised voices. No dramatic interruptions. Just the slow, methodical rhythm that defines most Senate hearings. But anyone watching closely could sense something building beneath the surface. Hirono continued to guide the conversation toward a single underlying concern: whether the Justice Department could truly remain independent if political pressure ever entered the equation. It was a question that has followed many nominees to powerful legal positions in Washington. And Hirono appeared determined to press the issue as far as she could. Across the room, several reporters leaned forward, sensing that the conversation was approaching a critical moment. Bondi maintained a composed posture at the witness table, hands folded lightly in front of her microphone as she listened. For several minutes, the questioning remained controlled and measured. Yet the tension in the room continued to grow with every answer. Because everyone in that chamber seemed to understand that sooner or later, the conversation would reach the question that had been quietly hanging over the entire hearing. And when that moment finally arrived, the calm atmosphere would disappear almost instantly. Then came the moment everyone would later talk about. For several minutes, the hearing had followed the familiar rhythm of a Senate confirmation proceeding: questions, careful answers, and polite acknowledgments between lawmakers and the nominee. But that rhythm suddenly shifted. Mazie Hirono leaned slightly closer to the microphone in front of her. Her voice remained calm, but the weight behind her next words was unmistakable. She asked Pam Bondi a question that instantly electrified the room. Would the Department of Justice, under Bondi's leadership, risk becoming what she called a Department of Revenge? The phrase cut through the chamber like a sudden crack of thunder. For a brief moment, the room seemed to pause. Several senators shifted in their seats. Staffers who had been quietly passing notes stopped moving. In the press section, reporters immediately began typing faster, knowing that a headline-worthy moment had just arrived. The question wasn't framed as a casual policy discussion. It carried the tone of a warning. Hirono's concern, like that of several other critics, centered on whether the immense power of the Justice Department could ever be used to target political opponents instead of pursuing justice impartially. Her words suggested a deeper fear shared by many observers in Washington. That the line between law enforcement and politics could blur if the wrong decisions were made at the top. And now, sitting at the witness table, Bondi was being asked to address that concern directly. The implication was unmistakable. Hirono wasn't just asking about legal philosophy. She was asking whether Bondi could truly separate law enforcement from political influence. The tension in the room grew heavier with each passing second. Some senators watched closely, waiting to see how Bondi would react. Others glanced down at their notes, perhaps anticipating a heated exchange. But the moment unfolded more quietly than many expected. Bondi didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she remained still, listening carefully as the senator finished speaking. Her posture stayed composed, hands resting lightly on the table in front of her microphone. Her expression revealed little, but observers could tell she understood the seriousness of the accusation being placed before her. For a brief pause, the hearing room fell into near silence. It was the kind of silence that often appears in high-stakes hearings, when everyone present knows the next few words could shape the narrative of the entire event. Across the chamber, camera lenses remained fixed on the witness table. This was the moment viewers watching on television, and later online, would replay again and again. Bondi took a small breath and leaned slightly toward her microphone. The pause had given her time to choose her words carefully. She understood that her response would not only address Senator Hirono's question but also signal to the entire committee, and the public, how she viewed the role of the Justice Department. Would she answer defensively? Would she push back against the accusation? Or would she try to shift the conversation toward broader principles about law and justice? The room waited. And then, after that brief but powerful pause, Pam Bondi began her response, Pam Bondi leaned slightly toward the microphone, and when she began speaking, her voice was calm, but unmistakably firm. She rejected the accusation outright. Bondi told the committee that the mission of the Department of Justice has always been rooted in three core principles: law, evidence, and accountability. In her view, those principles leave no room for political revenge or personal vendettas. According to Bondi, the department's responsibility is straightforward in theory, even if carrying it out can sometimes be complicated in the real world. Its job is to enforce the law equally, regardless of who is involved. Political party, public status, and influence should never determine whether someone is investigated or prosecuted. What matters, she explained, is whether the facts and the law support action. Looking across the hearing room, Bondi told the senators that prosecutors are trained to follow evidence wherever it leads. Their decisions must be guided by legal standards, established procedures, and the facts presented before them, not by political motivations or personal grudges. Her tone remained measured throughout the response. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse anyone of bad faith. But there was no mistaking the pushback behind her words. Without directly criticizing Mazie Hirono, Bondi made it clear that she disagreed with the premise of the question. She argued that describing potential investigations as revenge before any facts were established could itself create a dangerous narrative. According to Bondi, when public officials or commentators frame lawful investigations as acts of retaliation, it risks weakening public confidence in the justice system. And once that confidence is damaged, restoring it can be extremely difficult. Bondi explained that the Justice Department must remain above political narratives, both from supporters and critics. Its credibility depends on the public believing that prosecutors act based on law and evidence alone. She stressed that accountability should never be mistaken for revenge. If wrongdoing occurs, she said, the law requires investigators to examine the facts and determine whether legal action is appropriate. That responsibility applies no matter who the subject of an investigation might be. As Bondi spoke, several senators along the committee table nodded slightly, appearing to agree with the emphasis on equal enforcement of the law. Others, however, remained visibly skeptical. A few lawmakers kept their expressions neutral, flipping through documents or writing notes as the response continued. The contrast in reactions reflected the broader debate surrounding the hearing. Supporters saw Bondi's answer as a clear defense of legal independence and prosecutorial duty. Critics, meanwhile, questioned whether those principles would always hold firm once real-world political pressure entered the equation. Despite those underlying disagreements, the exchange itself remained controlled and respectful. No one interrupted. No voices were raised. On the surface, it looked like a routine back and forth between a senator and a nominee. But beneath that polite exterior, the tension in the room was unmistakable. Both sides understood that the conversation was not simply about one phrase or one question. It was about something much larger, the power of the Justice Department and the responsibility of those who lead it. And as the hearing moved forward, it was clear that this exchange would remain one of the defining moments of the day. As the questioning continued, the atmosphere inside the hearing room subtly shifted. The sharp exchange between Pam Bondi and Mazie Hirono had clearly changed the tone of the proceedings. What had started as a routine confirmation hearing was now carrying a heavier sense of scrutiny. Several senators who spoke afterward seemed eager to respond to the moment. Some lawmakers used their allotted time to defend Bondi, arguing that raising accusations about political motives before she had even taken office was premature. They pointed out that every attorney general nominee faces intense questioning, but that it was important to judge a nominee based on qualifications, experience, and commitment to the law rather than speculation about future actions. One senator emphasized that the Department of Justice has long operated under strict legal guidelines and internal checks designed to prevent abuses of power. According to that view, the system itself provides safeguards against politically motivated investigations. Others on the committee, however, echoed the concerns raised earlier by Hirono. They reminded the room that the Justice Department holds enormous authority within the federal government. Its ability to investigate, prosecute, and enforce federal law gives it power that can shape careers, reputations, and even national political debates. Because of that power, they argued, even the perception of political retaliation could damage the department's credibility. If the public begins to believe that investigations are influenced by political interests, trust in the justice system could erode quickly. For these senators, the hearing was not simply about Bondi as an individual nominee. It was about protecting the institutional independence of the Justice Department itself. Meanwhile, Bondi continued responding to questions with the same measured tone she had maintained throughout the hearing. Observers noticed that she chose her words very carefully. Legal analysts and commentators watching the hearing later pointed out that Bondi avoided several common traps that can turn tense hearings into full-blown confrontations. She did not attack Senator Hirono personally. She did not accuse critics of acting in bad faith. And perhaps most importantly, she never raised her voice or allowed the conversation to become emotional. Instead, she consistently brought the discussion back to broader institutional principles. Again and again, she emphasized the importance of the rule of law, the independence of prosecutors, and the responsibility of investigators to rely on evidence rather than political pressure. By focusing on those themes, Bondi kept the discussion grounded in legal standards rather than personal disagreements. That approach helped prevent the exchange from escalating into a heated argument. The hearing continued moving forward, with senators asking questions on a wide range of topics, from law enforcement priorities to administrative oversight. Yet despite the many issues discussed throughout the day, the earlier exchange remained fresh in the minds of everyone watching. Reporters continued referencing it in their notes. Observers in the gallery whispered quietly about the moment during brief pauses in the proceedings. Because even though the discussion had remained polite on the surface, it had touched on something far larger than a single nomination. The clash highlighted a deeper national debate that has been growing in recent years. A debate about the relationship between justice and politics. About how institutions maintain independence in a highly polarized environment. And about how leaders entrusted with powerful legal authority can maintain public trust in a system that depends on fairness above all else. In that sense, the exchange between Bondi and Hirono became more than just another moment in a Senate hearing. It became a snapshot of a much larger conversation unfolding across the country. Moments like this rarely dominate headlines because of shouting matches or dramatic theatrics. In fact, some of the most memorable moments in government hearings happen in a much quieter way. A carefully chosen phrase. A pause in the room that suddenly makes everyone realize something important has just been said. That was exactly the kind of moment that unfolded during the exchange between Pam Bondi and Mazie Hirono. On the surface, it looked like a routine part of a Senate confirmation hearing. A senator asked a tough question. A nominee responded. The discussion moved forward. But the reason the moment stood out was because it touched on questions far bigger than the individuals involved. Questions that have followed the Department of Justice for decades. Should law enforcement ever intersect with politics? In theory, the answer is simple: it shouldn't. The justice system is designed to operate independently from political influence. Prosecutors are expected to follow evidence, not partisan interests. Investigations are supposed to be guided by law and facts, not by who holds power or who stands in opposition to it. But in practice, things are rarely that simple. The Department of Justice operates inside a political system. Its leadership is appointed by elected officials. Its policies are shaped by administrations. And its decisions can sometimes have enormous political consequences. That reality makes independence both essential and incredibly difficult to maintain. And that is exactly why exchanges like the one between Bondi and Hirono draw so much attention. Hirono's question about a potential Department of Revenge reflected concerns shared by many observers who worry about the possibility of political influence creeping into legal decisions. Bondi's response, meanwhile, emphasized a different perspective, that the Justice Department must focus strictly on law, evidence, and accountability, regardless of political pressure. Neither position exists in isolation. Together, they represent two sides of an ongoing national conversation about how the justice system should function in a polarized political environment. Two public officials. Two very different perspectives. And one question that cut directly to the heart of the debate. Does the Justice Department always serve justice alone, or can political forces shape how that justice is pursued? As the hearing continued, senators moved on to other topics. There were additional questions about policy priorities, law enforcement strategies, and administrative responsibilities. Yet the earlier exchange continued to echo through the room. Reporters referenced it in their coverage. Political analysts discussed it on television panels later that evening. And viewers who watched the hearing replayed the moment again and again online. Because sometimes a single phrase becomes the defining moment of an entire event. In this case, it was two words that lingered long after the microphones were switched off. Department of Revenge. Whether people agreed with the question or the response, the phrase captured a concern that reaches far beyond one hearing or one nominee. It spoke to the delicate balance between power, law, and public trust. And in Washington, moments like that have a way of lasting far longer than anyone expects. If you found this breakdown of the hearing interesting, don't forget to like the video, thumbs up, share it with others who follow political and courtroom drama, and subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shape major legal and political debates.